As pandemics wreak havoc across the globe, it's hard not to wonder how our founding fathers might have handled the situation. But we know how. Just 6 months after the second inauguration of George Washington, yellow fever ripped through the city of Philadelphia. So, what did our founding fathers do? Today, we're going to take a look at how America's founding fathers reacted when an epidemic struck. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other founding father history you would like to hear about. Now, this is a story all about Philadelphia, where the Constitution was born and raised. About the founding fathers, where the yellow fever was happening and everything was crazed. Yellow fever is believed to have originated in Africa before being spread to North and South America via slave trade. The first verified outbreak in the New World occurred in Barbados in 1647, and by 1744 it had acquired the name yellow fever. Eventually, it became so widespread it was known as American Plague. The symptoms of yellow fever typically begin with muscle pain and fever. Next, the virus would attack the kidneys and the liver, which would cause the victim to become jaundiced, which earned it the name yellow fever. Finally, the patient would bleed internally, painfully vomit, and eventually perish. Cotton Mather, a minister and writer from 18th century New England, described victims of yellow fever as turning yellow, then vomiting, then bleeding every way. On September 9, 1793, a merchant named Samuel Breck recorded the deaths of 45 people who were suffering from yellow fever. He also noted that these 45 deaths were nothing compared to what followed. For just a few weeks later, another 1,000 people met their demise. Breck noted that the last stage of symptoms was insanity. Victims suffered what he called unimaginable torments, which sometimes included sudden attacks of rage. Breck described some cases as so severe that patients were driven to leave their sickbeds and roam the streets. One wandering man even waded into a river and drowned. It was late August of 1793 when a physician named Benjamin Rush, who also happened to be one of the United States founding fathers and signer of the Declaration of Independence, realized the epidemic sweeping through Philadelphia was no simple virus. It was yellow fever. As the news spread, people left the city in droves. One witness to the events recorded that the disease had created a universal terror in which citizens fled the city by whatever means they could, coach, wagon, or cart. Business grinded to a halt, and the streets emptied. Writing over a century later, historian Lillian Rhodes would observe that the hearse and the doctor's carriage were the sole vehicles on the street. And no wonder, for as Rhodes also notes, the hospitals were in a horrible condition. Nurses could not be had at any price. Despite the outbreak, President George Washington and his cabinet continued to meet in Philadelphia as late as September of 1793. The epidemic continued to spread, even infecting Secretary of the Treasury and future Lin-Manuel Miranda musical subject Alexander Hamilton. Washington tried to tough it out, but when his neighbors came down with yellow fever, he fled the city. So did 20,000 others, including Thomas Jefferson. Before long, Philadelphia, which once had a population of 50,000 people, was practically a ghost town. According to Samuel Breck, the city population was reduced by half, yet the disease continued to spread faster and faster. People who were healthy one day would be dead the next. Breck wrote, "The wealthy soon fled, the fearless or indifferent remained from choice, the poor from necessity." In 1793, Philadelphia was still the capital of both the United States of America and the state of Pennsylvania. So when yellow fever shut the town down, the state and federal governments shut down with it. Washington and his cabinet fled in September. Shortly thereafter, the legislature went into an indefinite recess when a dead body was discovered on the State House steps. It fell on Matthew Clarkson, the mayor of Philadelphia, and a small committee he formed to govern the city during the crisis. According to Samuel Breck, most of the wealthy citizens of Philadelphia fled the city. Historian Ashley Bowen suggests this was a politically sensitive issue for the young nation. They didn't want to suggest that Philadelphia wasn't a healthy place for the nation's capital, or that the republic itself was diseased. To help Philadelphia survive the epidemic, the mayor formed a committee that was known as, well, the committee. They distributed food, paid for relief efforts by taking out loans, and helped connect people with doctors. They also arranged to take donations of money and supplies from concerned Philadelphians and Americans in other cities.
Death and grief. It pervades nearly every house in the city.
Benjamin Rush was a prominent doctor, especially when it came to fighting yellow fever. He took on a leadership role. He worked for the College of Physicians to identify the fever's causes, develop new treatments, and educate the public about how to avoid contracting it. He refused to flee the city, declaring, "I have resolved to stick to my principles, my practice, and my patients to the last extremity." And he meant it. He kept working even when he contracted the fever himself. However, while Rush's dedication to fighting the disease was no doubt sincere, his results often left a little something to be desired. During the epidemic, Benjamin Rush observed that immigrants from the French West Indies didn't seem to contract yellow fever. From this, he concluded that black men and women were immune to the disease, writing, "From the accounts of the yellow fever which had been published by many writers, I was led to believe that the black population in our city would escape it." Rush widely publicized his theory, which ultimately wound up doing more harm than good because, well, it just wasn't true. The immigrants Rush studied had likely developed an immunity to yellow fever after previous exposure in the West Indies, where the disease was widespread. The free black people living in Philadelphia at the time didn't really share that immunity. Unfortunately, they listened to Rush. After Rush proclaimed that black people were immune to yellow fever, members of a religious organization called the Free African Society voluntarily offered to furnish nurses to attend to the afflicted. Their usual mission was to provide aid exclusively to free Africans and their descendants, but they were so touched by the strife throughout the city, they were willing to make an exception. Sadly, this act of selflessness would cost them. The volunteers quickly began to fall ill, and Rush realized he was wrong about their immunity. He somberly admitted he had been mistaken, writing, "The black people took the disease in common with the white people, and many of them passed." 2 months into the epidemic, Benjamin Rush began promoting a treatment, blood leeching. He recommended removing the blood and the purging of the patient's system by administering mercury. Rush insisted the treatment would save lives, but not everyone believed him. Journalist William Cobbett called Rush a quack. In all fairness to Rush, he probably sincerely believed his own science. When he himself took ill with yellow fever, he administered his own treatment and lived. In the absence of a verifiable explanation, the Founding Fathers strongly disagreed over what was causing the outbreak. Benjamin Rush suggested rotten food being sold at the wharf was infecting people via miasma, the now debunked theory that disease is spread via bad smells and polluted air. However, Alexander Hamilton, who was not throwing away his shot to win the argument, believed the disease was being spread by white refugees fleeing conflicts in the Caribbean. The two also argued over the best treatment. Rush recommended bloodletting and mercury purges. Hamilton, on the other hand, promoted what was called the West Indian treatment, which was also known as the bark and wine cure. Hamilton's proposed treatment was quinine bark, which, while effective against malaria, didn't actually help with yellow fever. Still though, given that he wasn't sapping blood from the patient while infusing their system with toxic levels of mercury, Hamilton's treatment would have definitely been the lesser of two evils. Given how little was known about the cause of the outbreak, the Founding Fathers who stayed to work on the problem kept a very open mind. Benjamin Rush even considered the possibility that the illness had come from space, noting that just before the outbreak began, a meteor was seen at 2 o'clock in the morning on or about the 12th of September. While that sounds like a pretty good basis for a sci-fi movie, not every suggestion he had was so fantastic. Rush later decided that the culprit was more likely to be a shipment of rotting coffee. Ironically, the source of the yellow fever was right under Rush's nose, and he never even knew it. He noted in journals that mosquitos were uncommonly numerous during the yellow fever outbreak. Scientists would eventually determine that those mosquitoes were, in fact, the cause of the epidemic. Rush, however, never made the connection. At the time of the epidemic, Philadelphia was arguably the most important city in the United States. Washington, D.C. was still under construction, so Congress and the President worked out of the city of brotherly love. It also had the busiest port in the nation, which would become the subject of much debate during the outbreak. With goods and people arriving every day, many felt the fever must have made its way into Philly through the port. Both Hamilton and Rush had their eye on it at various points, with Hamilton blaming refugees and Rush blaming polluted goods. The yellow fever outbreak of 1793 brought Philadelphia to its knees. By October, 5,000 were dead and another 20,000 had fled. By the time it was all over, one of the most important populous cities in a proud new nation was literally decimated. 1 in 10 Philadelphians had died. Samuel Breck later reflected on the fact that the lower classes were, as usual, struck the hardest. According to him, no hospitals were prepared to alleviate the sufferings of the poor, and for a long time nothing could be done other than to furnish coffins and men to bury them. In the end, neither Rush nor Hamilton nor any other doctor was able to figure out the epidemic. It ended by pure luck, when a cold snap killed off most of the mosquito population. So what do you think? How would the Founding Fathers handle our current epidemic? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.